Average person out there that doesn't get to go to gigs, for the average person that can't access a company like Canon Assets or that understands the world of finance and macroeconomics, your body of knowledge is practically inaccessible. That's a problem that we have generally with the door on academics in South Africa. We don't have a great culture, in my opinion, of what I call public academics.
Okay.
They tend to stay in their little
hidden.
They stay in their little niches.
Yeah.
I've been to some fantastic events in the banking and finance world, and you get there, and everybody's wearing a black suit and tie. The most creative guy in the room is the marketing guy. He's wearing a slightly blue suit. And it's very, very difficult to access those worlds. So it's just a fantastic opportunity for us to have you here. We'll get you out onto YouTube and Spotify and Apple and all those other fantastic places. You are a remarkably articulate thinker. You have the ability to synthesize a broad amount of information from quite a number of different facets of academia and just life in general. I think that your understanding of economics has produced a thinker in you that is a little bit more down to earth and a little bit more aligned with the average South African than many are, especially people in terms of the banking and finance world, people who understand investments and that kind of thing. So it's really fantastic to have you here, and we appreciate it a lot. In terms of getting to the point in your life where you are such an articulate thinker with this incredible capacity to synthesize knowledge, who are the people along your journey that have most influenced this, aside from obviously impressive academic accreditations and that sort of thing? Who are the people in your life, all the way back from the beginning of your childhood, that have most shaped your ability to carry yourself in such a way?
I suppose it's sort of self-evident to go for the obvious, and say, my parents. We could start there. I grew up in a family where, I had a father who was very involved in business, in industry, and I think it helps if you, even if you are getting through, a Brownian motion or osmosis, you're just sort of picking up, filtering from the air and from conversations at dinner tables or in car rides. I think of going to school with my dad, and each morning it was the business news that was on, and then as we got into teenage years, we could influence him to flip to music. But I think that would be a very obvious influence. In the next sort of pocket of my life, I think about my academic development. I was extremely fortunate late in my undergrad to have a professor, Anthony Lumby, who took a deep interest in me. And I found an incredibly strong connection with him. I was fascinated by the work he was involved in, essentially international finance. And he landed up supervising my postgraduate research, both my master's and my doctorate, and became an incredible mentor. We landed up publishing together, so I guess I could say that we ultimately turned out to be colleagues. But he had a huge influence on shaping my thinking, and also giving like a very pragmatic grounding that is actually an economic historian by training. And what I've found, especially in my academic work, is there is so much to be learned from history. We can drag the models along with us, but all of those models happen in a context and a framework that makes them so relevant and so real. And I think Anthony had a profound influence on me in that way. And then to iterate to very recent or more recent, when I say very recent, I guess I'm giving my age.
Yeah.
Last 20 years, I've been at Gibbs, and when I first met the founder of Gibbs, Nick Benadell,
Yes.
Professor Nick Benadell, within moments of meeting him, I knew that there was a incredibly powerful connection, and Nick has had a disproportionate and very powerful influence on my life. First pointing me in certain career directions inside of the business school environment. And I think being inside of a business school environment also, there's a reality check there that you have to get out of the modeling and the ivory towers that Main Street might poo-poo about, and you have to be grounded in thinking what's the relevance and where does the rubber hit the road. And so Nick has had a profound influence in that way, helping me establish global network, influencing my business career and my academic career. And so I put those three people down as really having shaped me. I can think of dozens of others. A very good friend of mine, Charlene Liu, who urged me to get into corporate work, and that helped build my consulting advisory capacity capabilities. So Charlene has had a real influence on me. So I could quickly go to other people, but I would say that those are amongst the most important.
It's a bit of a coincidence because Charlene Liu saved me at Gibbs. I wouldn't have got my MBA done if it wasn't for her. So thank you, Charlene. If you
she saved me on other occasions too.
And Professor Benadell is a remarkable human being. I've mentioned on the show before Professor Mtombeni. Just some of the most remarkable thinkers in the entire country, all collected in one little building in Ilovo, in the middle of the richest square mile in Africa. And what a fantastic bunch of thinkers, but how difficult it is for the average person to access that kind of world. But I absolutely have to agree with you on those. Obviously, your parents, everybody would agree with that. No one's going to argue. But with those two thinkers, just truly remarkable.
As you're saying that, can I drop another one in?
Please do.
Because if he ever hears this, he'll be very angry, and he'll send me a WhatsApp with rude words in it. And it was as I was going through my postgraduate work. I'd had some really, really tough personal yards. I'd taken, maybe we come to this in another part of the conversation, but I'd been through a particularly tough personal patch, and I landed up working with a guy, Nick Amin, who'd grown up in Uganda, lived in the UK, and then landed up in South Africa at my university, then University of KwaZulu-Natal. And Nick and I worked together, and Nick was just this unbelievably frank, clear-minded. There ain't going to be any messing around, in my conversation with you. He is 15 years older than me, and took on the role of not quite a father, but sort of a big brother or, uncle figure, and really, really helped ground me and pulled me through a murky, woolly, fuzzy, tough patch in my life.
Is he an economist?
He's a development economist, and he's worked especially in agriculture. And so we did a lot of work together in research, working in the agricultural cluster, international trade, figuring out how you build inclusive agricultural sectors, how you realign very old models that work well for owners but don't work well for society. So we did a lot of work together in the late 1990s and into the 2000s together. And But long answer, short answer. Yeah, he's a development economist by background.
I'd love to be able to chat to him sometime in the future. We've been trying to get one Dilesi Shlobo on the show.
Okay. Also a great guy.
He's all over the place like you. He teaches at 2 different universities, and you're right, and he does private work, and he's not.
Well, he's a fellow at our Center for African Management and Markets. So I know how hard he is to pin down.
Yeah, no, he is a remarkably difficult guy to get hold of, especially now with all the books and that kind of thing. But again, just a truly fantastic mind. I'd love to be able to pick his brain at some stage. So if you do bump into him, tell him to get back to bed.
I'll try and pin him down.
You are associated with the most esteemed academic institutions. What are your thoughts on the glaring and widening gaps between these remarkable institutions, places like Henley and Gibbs, and institutions like Fort Hare that are in the midst of assassination attempts and corruption scandals and all that kind of skullduggery? Are there any thoughts that you have on this widening gap and its impact on society, the broader economy, people? Just any thoughts in general on that?
Aidan, from our time in class together, you know that one of my deep interests is in inequality and exclusion. There are so many lenses that you can bring to this. The moment you start talking about inequality in a South African context, people immediately think about income inequality. What I love about your observation, I suppose what I hate about your observation, is you pointing to the fact that inequality is glaring in so many facets, whether it's access to healthcare, access to education, access to data. Can I get access to fast, cheap, reliable, uninterrupted, broad, deep data in a world of artificial intelligence, generative AI, like data is the new oil. And if you don't have access to this, you're going to get left behind quickly. Fort Hare plays Gibbs is a similar but different reference. That I was in class just last night, and I look around the room, and what always surprises me is the room doesn't have a sense of. Generally, it sounds like an accusation. What always surprises me is the room doesn't seem to always have the immediate sense of that they aren't the 1%, they're the 0.1%. And that'll give some sense of just how big the disparities are, because whilst there might be difference between Gibbs and other universities that you've mentioned or come to mind, they the 10%, they're not the 90%. There are others who are left or locked, not left behind, completely locked out. And that's disappointing, because access to these types of resources are important components of achieving social mobility. And we are locked in a structure where social mobility is amongst the lowest in the world. There's a piece of research which talks about how many generations it is needed to get you from the lowest quintile, the lowest 20% income earning in society, to the highest 20% income earning in society, keeping in mind that income earning is just one measure, but it's an obvious and easy measure of mobility. And if we go to Denmark, Norway, you can move from the lowest to the highest inside of 2 or 3 generations. That what your grandparents earned may not influence what you earned. Whereas in South Africa, this research points to it being as many as 8 or 9 generations. In other words, it's what your great, I think there's one more great that we need to do, grandparents earned. That shapes your earnings, and that just speaks about an absolutely socially paralyzed structure. Deeply frustrating, and I would point to at least 2 things. The one is the legacy that, this country's legacy the apartheid architecture, those scars and wounds are deep and still with us. But I would also point to policy failure in the last 30 years, that there's been lots of pointing and talking and blaming. We haven't got on with it.
I would definitely have to agree with that. Policy failure in our higher education system, right through down to our basic education, has been absolutely dismal. We have failed successive generations of young children. In my opinion, you have to almost cut off people that are over the age of 6 now. It sounds crazy if you want to correct the system. And you have to start with the grade 1s and make sure that they make excellent grade 2s and then excellent grade 3s and then excellent grade 4s. And then you get to the point after 12 years where you start to fix the higher education system broadly. That's my opinion.
Sure.
I'm certainly not an expert.
We need to be careful with that because, that sort of starts to creep into, you're disadvantaging me because of some, essentially arbitrary. I take your point, and I get, I get a really strong sense of what you've got to think about the allocation of resources, right?
Yes, it's exactly what it is.
And, maybe to sort of put some weight behind what you're saying without necessarily endorsing it, because I think there's a whole lot of challenges that would bring, certainly frustrating and already deeply frustrated youth, where we display one of the highest rates of unemployment in the world. Sub 35 unemployment rate sit at 65%, 70%. These are just harrowing numbers, and we haven't moved that number in a decade. But not to lose my point, you talk about getting basic education, primary education right. I think that there is a precursor to that we are getting wrong, and it's the first 1,000 days. And around the world, the evidence suggests that if you get those first 1,000 days right, it's the single biggest return that you achieve on human capital. Over lifetime, the return on human capital is in the order of 20%. And think of lifting a person's lifetime capability by 20%. It's just a permanent game changer.
You're talking about things like early childhood nutrition.
Exactly, right? Exactly. So those first 1,000 days, the first 300 days are in the womb, and then the next 700 days are, very, very early childhood development. And I think the especially important or poignant point about that is the level of investment or capital required to achieve that is the lowest of all education formats. But the outcome, the impact is the highest. When you look at South Africa's budget allocation, we don't spend there. We think that the time to fix is in tertiary education. That if we get that right, somehow we're going to achieve the highest mobility. But we've got the basic fundamentals wrong.
I agree with that. We tend to focus on university students because they can turn over rubbish bins and they can make a bit of noise. They can basically protest. But obviously, children at nursery schools and primary schools and creches, mothers with very small infants, they're not out in the street protesting, so they get a little bit less airtime. I'm glad that I made my somewhat dull comment because your response was quite profound. So I'm not proud of what I said in hindsight, not the smartest thing to say.
It's a great conversation.
The feedback was immense, because that is a fantastic point. That again we're not doing particularly well with our metrics for the first 1,000 days. Yeah,
and if you look at the outcomes measured by early school outcomes, primary school outcomes. At very young ages, children just don't have basic, literacy. They can read a sentence, but they can't read a sentence and interpret it, with comprehension.
You're reading for understanding.
Yeah, and you see this. It's an absolute indictment, because South Africa's education budget is amongst the highest of all middle-income countries as a percentage of GDP. We spend more than most other middle-income countries, but our education outcomes are amongst the poorest. So, what's going wrong? And what frustrates me immensely is we just don't seem to be wrestling with that fundamental truth. It's like this doesn't need another speech. It doesn't need another promise. It's like a recognition that we've failed you. We've failed these children as a society. Later on, these children are young adults, and no amount of hard work and fixing and can gather back these lost years, and so that it doesn't come across as I'm sort of preaching from some balcony. If I just think of my own personal circumstance, my children are the result of a failed marriage, and I think of the damage that has been done to them through that consequence. No amount of therapy reverses that. Like, the damage is permanent, and they'll carry that for the rest of their life. So I'm not sort of preaching and holier than thou, and I haven't these are mistakes that I've made in my life, and lessons that have landed with some very high costs. Then to can I do something about this? Well, here's some news. At home, we've got a baby coming.
Oh boy.
Yeah, oh boy. I'm 55. There's a baby on the way, but it's not mine. The baby is our domestic worker, Sally's baby. And I think of all of the huge impacts we can have on this soon-to-be-born baby's life. As we're recording this today, the baby's actually at the clinic. Sally's going for a checkup today. So we're making sure that she's getting regular checkups. We've given her vitamin supplements, and these are very modest investments, but yes, they have disproportionate impacts on this soon-to-be-born baby, who I've asked, could the middle name be Adrian? Either gender.
Let me know how that works out for you. I hope there's another Adrian on the way. Suggest Aidan as well. Now that we're on controversial comments, let me throw out another perhaps somewhat dull or radical comment. Seeing as you're into development economics, I think that our schools, our primary schools and all the way through the education system, but particularly at the tertiary level, our universities and our technikons, I think are very, very poorly aligned with our economic aspirations. It goes back to policy. I believe that we are producing the wrong kinds of thinkers en masse in this country, and we are not producing the right kinds of minds. And those that are being produced are being pushed away by South Africa, by the macroeconomic climate and some of the policies that are emerging. For example, NHI with the medical sector. And this is where things get really heated. It's maybe as a thought experiment. I think that we need to defund the humanities to some extent until we have proper economic alignment with our national goals. As an example, I went through the humanities system. I am a postgraduate product of a fine arts university, liberal arts university in South Africa, and I went through the politics mill. And they produce students like me en masse. None of us can find jobs with just those qualifications in and of itself. I know my friends in sociology and anthropology, they all have the same sorts of problems. And I believe that they should rather divert some of that funding into other programs. For example, if we need more nurses or if we need more police. And not only that, but I think that to some extent, because of the heavy influence of the nature of socialist and Marxist teachings in our humanities, in our South African universities, we have a very heavy leaning protest culture, if I can call it that is developing in these spaces. And they are disruptive and don't add enough value to the economy. Bearing in mind, I'm a product of the system.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure if you know this. My undergrad degree is an arts degree.
Okay. No, I didn't know that. I saw that you went to UKZN.
Yeah. So my undergrad is arts, and I then sort of iterated to economics and law, and I got postgrads in economics, international finance, etc. So,
as a me personally, as a high school dropout, with not a very impressive academic background at all. It was all I could get into. So I also understand that it's a necessary segue for people into the education system, and that it does play its role. I'm just thinking about the mass funding and the way that we fund our education and tertiary systems, and that it's completely misaligned with what we're teaching at university and what we're teaching at high school, and then what people are learning at universities, and of course the job market as a whole. So just in terms of the very dire need to flywheel economic development in South Africa, just as an idea or a concept, I was wondering, do you think it's too dull or too radical, or a little bit of both?
There's so many things so many provocations in that. Just first, so that I can clear my head, I want to go back to your earlier question about the influences. And I want to add one more person into the pot. Maybe I'll add others if we keep going. But a woman called Ntabaseng Lekwete, who is actually a Gibbs student of mine. And Ntabaseng and I have become distant. We were partnered in business, and although things didn't land up in the place that we wanted to, the lessons and the things that I gained through working with her and being involved with her, just life-changing. So I want to add Ntabaseng into the pot.
And she was, I think, in the humanities space.
She's a medical doctor, and we actually partnered in a business in Diepsloot, in Bromfishville in Soweto, in Tembisa.
That was the hospital, the one-floor hospital.
Quali Health. And it's such a powerful business model. And I have an enduring ambition to go back to that and have another go at doing that, because the impact of that business model is just unbelievably high in so many different ways, and Ntabaseng was at the heart of that, venture. So I think it would be remiss not to mention her in passing. To come back to your question, though, I'd reinforce my earlier point that whether we're spending on engineers, accountants, economists, poets, political scientists, we're spending too much at that level, that we should be cascading that or waterfalling that down to the first 1,000 days, and making sure that we've got that right before we worry about getting the top right. So, it's sort of like painting the house, but you've built it on the San Andreas fault, and you're painting the house and worrying about whether the paint should be matte or gloss. You're asking the wrong question. So, I know that that's not your point.
No, it makes complete sense.
But I don't want to lose that point. So, now if we come to, should we be educating poets and politicians, there's a legacy in this, that aspect of the education system is a critical component that pulled down the apartheid state. If that wasn't there, I think that we may not even be having this conversation today. So I feel like it's worth just keeping sight of that maybe we still have this with us. It's part of our legacy, part of our history. It still doesn't change your sharp point, which is, but we've moved on. We're in a different circumstance, and we have a lot of people who are being educated in a system that when they pop out the system, there's no place for them to land. We don't need more poets and politicians. We need more people with pragmatic application. And here I would go to a couple of things that I think could be quite easily fixed or remedied. The first is, for some insane reason, South Africa abandoned the apprentice system. Like, why on earth we ever thought that was a smart idea? And apprentices would come out of school in what I'd call standard 8, now grade 10, and you'd go into fitting and turning, welding, plumbing, electricians. These are just key components of modern society. And for some insane reason, South Africa decided that we were going to change the education system. And that was a part of the education system that historically has worked really well in building valuable blue-collar skills. So I think that's actually relatively easily remedied. The other aspect that I'm surprised by is when we take people through school and then through university, the conversation with industry and with business is entirely well, maybe it's non-existent or it's artificial, and that as people come out of the education system, they simply aren't work ready. And there's a very pragmatic part of work readiness that's missing. I think of the German model at the university level, where German engineers, for instance, are permanently partnered with businesses so that they do half and half through their curriculum. And when they come out of their education system, they migrate almost seamlessly into the work environment. So I think of that type of business model. There's a technocratic structure that's missing. And then perhaps, to pull a tiny bit of sting out of the tail of your point, is I don't think that it's necessarily the case that if you have a training in ancient Egyptian architecture, that you're going to be bad in business. Because I think what a tertiary education system builds in particular is the ability to think, to solve, to synthesize. And I don't see why a poet, a person who studied ancient Egypt, is any less capable of doing this than an engineer or a mathematician. They might think about things differently, but they've got the ability to educate, to discipline, to manage, to solve, to integrate. Yeah.
You have an amazingly broad perspective on that, because you've encompassed an aspect of humanity and society that I think a lot of economists or maybe engineers or physicists might have opted to leave out, where you've included the humanity aspect of...
No, the economists will tell you do STEM.
Yeah.
STEM and we're solved.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. Before we leave this general realm of this particular aspect of academia, I'd like to just ask about the fusion that we seem to be having in the production at the postgraduate level in the humanities of socialist and communist ideology that has this awkward mix with kind of ANC-style government policy and its odd impact on the business space, particularly on international relations. Andre de Ruyter mentioned in his book, or in maybe an interview, that they walked the halls of Eskom calling each other comrade, and that when this came up in a big international meeting of investors, that it was somewhat embarrassing for him. And what are your thoughts on this?
Sure. I mean, one part of me wants to say this is archaic.
Yeah.
I get your point. Absolutely. It's archaic. In the same breath, I'm an economist, so I'm allowed two views. But in the same breath, look at some of the most successful models that have materialized in the last 20, 30 years. State-led capitalism in China, unbelievably successful. I think they call each other comrade.
Is China not about a collapse? It seems to be having a population issue.
China's got problems. China's got a huge demographic problem, hopelessly overinvested, and all of the challenges that come with single-party state. But I want to bring I suppose my pushback on your point is not to defend calling each other comrade. I think that that is archaic and it won't travel well. If you're trying to raise finance from the World Bank to build dams and irrigation systems, or to build fiber optic cable, if you're trying to raise infrastructure from the World Bank or the IFC, and you're calling each other comrade, that isn't going to travel well, because that doesn't sit well with the so-called Washington consensus. But it's worth keeping in mind that the Washington consensus hasn't got everything right, and we've got some fantastic pieces of evidence from the people who call each other comrade under state-led capitalism. So I'd want to bring sort of a slightly broader perspective to it, notwithstanding my pushback on your observation. I do think that it is outdated. It would be the equivalent of calling each other me lord, me lady, or sire. This is in the past. This is not contemporary language. It's not going to be the type of. It's not going to be the way you address each other. In boardrooms and in business environments. So why hang on to it?
To defend China, to play the devil's advocate, if somebody came to me tomorrow and said, I could lift that many people out of poverty in 30 years, but we're going to have to call each other comrade, I would get my little comrade beret out quicker than you could imagine.
Yeah. But, and so let's just stay with that for a second also. There's a pragmatism in that. And I think that's often confused when people sort of try and distill how China has been so successful. Is there's such a lovely saying that that references us to the way in which policy was conducted under the single party state. And the one-liner goes, I don't care what color the cat is as long as it catches mice. So your point, call me comrade, can you get the job done? Can you get this done on time, under budget, and will it work? And does it lift, I don't know the number offhand, but hundreds of millions of people out of poverty in the space of a generation?
I don't mind giving China credit in terms of that. What a phenomenal job. I hope that their population issues and their 99-year property lease and that kind of thing can be resolved. They seem to also have a heavy centralization of power issue. I wish we could talk about this all day. It's you can see these podcasts have to be managed because they become Joe Rogan-esque, 4 hours or 5 hours long. Going from China, because they're having some middle market issues.
Real problems.
Yeah, real issues. And that segues me, that segues me into the next set of questions where we focus more on South Africa. I was sitting in one of your lectures about 5 years ago, and you said, more or less, that one of the scariest things that could happen to the South African economy going forward would be the hollowing out of the middle class. Mm-hmm. And I would argue that we're 5 or 6 years from that point in time. And I would say that the middle class in South Africa has been hollowed out quite drastically. And has this nightmare come to fruition, in your opinion? And if so, how deep is the trouble?
South Africa has been moving into increasingly difficult territory for a decade or more, I would venture. That the first 15 years of ANC rule were profound. There was a powerful political transition, the Rainbow Nation. I would go so far as to venture, if you take the assassination of Chris Hani in 1993, that tragic event should have seen South Africa descend into civil war. The fact that we didn't and held peaceful, fair elections a year later is a political miracle. And then over the next 15 years, that political miracle was joined by the early part of half a miracle. That the middle class that South Africa grew, or that grew in South Africa, let's put it the other way around, the so-called black diamonds, over that period stands out as the fastest emerging middle class anywhere in the world, adjusted for population size. This was a spectacular episode in the country's history. The economic historian Charles de Kuit says South Africa is a country that has advanced economically by windfall and politically by disaster. And that was apartheid South Africa. And under the first part of the ANC administration, that became South Africa as a country that is advancing politically by miracle and economically by leaps and bounds. What we were doing over the 1990s, probably up to the hosting of the World Cup. And then somewhere around there, things went wrong. I'm making a much longer answer of this, so cut me out or edit me down. But there's a big point here. So the first thing is what went wrong. Was it the Zuma administration and the hollowing out that happened with state capture, possibly? Taking us for absolute idiots with a fire pool. Was it that the first 15 years were just grabbing low-hanging fruit and that it was never sustainable under any leadership, that whoever took over was not going to be able to achieve that same type of gain? I think that's a second lens. The third is this happened all around the time of global financial crisis, and some economies recovered better than others from global financial crisis. So there's a whole bunch of things that I think have to be put into the pot to try and explain, where we land up. And I'm not apologizing for one moment for Zuma's abysmal leadership. We were taken into a very dysfunctional place, huge hollowing out of state capacity, capabilities, and that institutional vacuum and void is dangerous. And it puts us in a precarious place. So to fast forward to my early observation, we've been sort of wading into this increasingly dangerous water. And I grew up in Durban, so let me use sort of an ocean analogy. There comes a point where that the rips start to pull you around, and you lose control. I worry about the extent to which policymakers and politicians in South Africa, and they are distinct groups, people confuse them, but both politicians and policymakers have a grip on South Africa's direction. And we're doing this session together on the cusp of the election. So, we'll start knowing by within the next, I suppose, 48 hours, what South Africa thinks of the current lay of the land. But I can't imagine how a party who has been in control for 30 years and has an outcome that is a 33% unemployment rate. If you use a strict definition, if you use a broader definition, you get to 45% unemployment. Youth unemployment is at 70%. We go to some parts of the country, Bushbuck Ridge, unemployment is 80%. Now, these are people who are permanently locked out. Economic mobility, social mobility is amongst the lowest in the world. Income inequality is amongst the highest. And many people, the middle class that you're referring to, have given up hope. And when people lose hope, you have lost, I think, your most valuable ingredient. So I think that the urging for whoever has control of the country come 30 May, I think that the priority is to establish, one, a sense of purpose, direction, that there is something for us collectively to buy into. There isn't a collective vision and purpose. We're a highly fragmented society. So what is the collective buy-in that this leadership will bring, that we can act with a collective purpose? And then the second is, can we please get out of the business of talking and promising and blaming and pointing and kicking things, and instead just get on with delivery. No part of that is an apology for the atrocities of the past. I want to be so clear on that. But we are caught in our own drama to the extent that we are not fixing very broken parts of this society. And here my hero of fixing is Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the head of Liberia. She's appointed head of state in 2012. And when she comes to power, she doesn't put in place a 15-year plan or a 30-year plan. She puts in place a 150-day plan. You can't hide from that. So I think that there's two things that will galvanize and engage not just the middle class, but all of South Africa. And that's the sense of purpose, identity, that we're in pursuit of the same thing, and there is no way you can achieve this pulling in different directions and with high levels of fractionalization and fragmentation.
While our leadership talks about policy and narrative as their primary dominance in discourse, the children literally drown in pit latrine toilets. It's definitely become very much a part of the South African way of life. In terms of leading into that, can South Africa be pulled out of its debt spiral? Nice, simple question. And if so, how can it be pulled out of its current debt spiral? Have we not gone too far?
We've got a big debt problem, and it's getting worse, if there is such a term, and even worser. So we're going backwards, and this is part of wading deeper into the water. We're getting pulled, by the riptide. Our interest rates on the cost of our debt is high for an emerging market. Much higher than peers, and that is pointing to the unsustainability of our fiscal circumstance. And the case is because we're spending money on the wrong things. That if we look at the fiscal circumstance, Vulindlela has done some impressive things, but not enough. Vulindlela needs to double down. And I can be positive on a couple of things. I hear like lots of negative things. Maybe we can reference some of those positive things in a moment. But South Africa, coming out of global financial crisis, our debt to GDP was 25%. We were amongst the best in the world. Here we are, 15 years later, and we aren't the worst in the world, But for an emerging market in our circumstance, we're in tricky territory. The cost of debt, interest rates that we pay is now the single largest line item on our national budget. So we are servicing pay-as-you-go financing, and the debt is being fed by a budget deficit that is way ahead of the economic growth rate. That's unsustainable. We need to get economic growth up to 3.5–4% territory for us to start making a proper dent into unemployment and to sustain it at that 3.5–4%. And we need to get the budget deficit below, well below that 3.5–4% for us to then start stabilizing and reversing the level of debt to GDP. And all of that said, we are spending money. The deficit is being fueled by the fact that we're spending money on wages and salaries rather than infrastructure. In the same breath, the absence of infrastructure means that the private sector has also gone missing in action over the last 15 years. So the infrastructural financing from the public sector, infrastructural spend rather from the public sector, means that the private sector, sure, I've really confused that. But the absence of public sector infrastructure spend means that the private sector has also been shy on infrastructure spend. And that allows me to make a further point that for South Africa to find its way out of this, which is your point. So first, we have to curtail that deficit spending. Second, we have to think about how we get the growth structure much higher and sustainably higher. And third, the missing component is investment spending. And there is no way we can get elevated investment spending by just the private sector or just the public sector doing it. It is necessarily a cocktail, and we're quickly then in the language of public-private partnership. So yes, we can do it.
It's interesting that you say that we can still do this. I would say that we are increasingly on the back foot because of radical policies in South Africa.
Sure.
Things like NHI, for example, make it very difficult to invest in the health sector. Water rights issues make it very difficult to invest in agriculture and farming. Land expropriation has its own set of issues. People just don't want to put down capital in fixed infrastructure anymore. It's become a very difficult thing to get people to do because of all these radical policies. Given the importance of property rights and the vast significance of property rights, especially in light of what we're seeing now in China with the 99-year property rights lease issue, do you think that we are even in a space where it's possible to do this kind of public sector and private sector investment, given that we might be into a 10-year deluge of lawsuits around policy issues? I know that
with the NHI.
Well, not just with NHI.
That you referenced.
The farmers are all going to go to bat against the government with the water appropriation bill that's looming. Bella bill, private education is going to go to war, so are parents. If you are thinking about opening up a private school in South Africa in the near future, you might just decide not to do that now. And all of these spaces have massive opportunity for high capital investment, job growth, and every time one of these policies comes up, it puts a 5 or 10 year barrier, in my opinion, on turning around the South African economy and our financial situation, our macroeconomic financial situation in just one more pocket, but they slowly start to add up as we go through them. Yeah. So just as an example, Wayne Duvenage is gearing up, I can tell you right now, for a 10-year slog. It's going to be like e-tolls and steroids against NHI. And it could take a decade, given that this could take a decade and that there are so many of these policies on the horizon. I'm worried that this is going to put up a 10-year war on turning around these necessary financial situations that the South African economy finds itself in.
Yeah. So, Aidan, at least two things spring to mind. The first is, whilst you're talking about, strident policy and, policy that might stick in the throat. We could probably debate that till the cows come home. South Africa needs universal healthcare. South Africa needs universal education. Can we afford it? Is it sensible in the current form and the form that has now been ushered in? Those are much, much bigger conversations, and we can do this well into next week. But there is no question that when it comes to inclusion and universal rights, that the two critical components are education and healthcare. And I'll go to war on those things, that those are fundamental human rights. South Africa has a grossly unequal education system, that the people who pop out of our best universities find their way to Oxford, Cambridge, INSEAD, Harvard, Princeton. No problem. They can get in. They are world class. In our healthcare system, I'm a type 1 diabetic. I'm highly reliant on insulin and the ability to measure and monitor myself. If those things fall over, I'm dead quickly. And that gives me a deep appreciation for the circumstance that most South Africans find themselves in. I'm unbelievably privileged. Other people's birth circumstance means that they don't have this privilege. We have to fix this. Okay, now, are those the right policies? I think that's a discussion for another day, another show perhaps. But universal healthcare, universal education are fundamental human rights that we have not addressed. If I come to, I guess, sort of a less a strident response to your observation, and I think a very poignant point that you make. If you think about what business people, what investors hate, it's uncertainty and it's red tape. And South Africa has dished these up in bucket loads. And I really hear that in your points. So the uncertainty, now what do we do about NHI? What does the healthcare system look like? If I'm a type 1 diabetic, am I going to have access to health? Like, I have to think, very seriously about what this means for me and, what that might mean for my access to critical healthcare. Is that available? That puts a question mark over it. Now, if that's my question mark, other people have got similar questions. And the moment you inject that type of uncertainty into a system, people quickly go onto the back foot. You made that point earlier. And when you go onto the back foot, you put your hands in your pockets, and people aren't going to be building new businesses. People aren't going to be allocating capital. They're going to figure out how to protect what they have and try and find safe places for their capital to live, in the shade somewhere else in the world. Mapping out plan B. And I think you I read a veiled reference to where the middle class in South Africa might be. A lot of them have, with Get Up and Go, have got up and left. South Africa has a huge skills drain. And that is early on, late apartheid years, early post-apartheid. I think that was a demographic observation. We could classify it by race. It is not a race observation anymore. That South Africa's middle class has said there are better places for me to be in the world, whether it's Australia, Canada, Singapore, etc. And uncertainty injects injects energy or motivation into that migration. The second is, wow, have we become our own worst enemy on red tape and bureaucracy? I'm involved in building a new business, so maybe this is a bit of hypocritical, where I'm saying investors hate uncertainty. Here I am starting a new business. I'm having a go. I think that I can make a difference in this country by building a beautiful new business. But boy, is it tough, hey? I mean, the red tape and the bureaucracy in this country are eye-watering. The number of forms I have to fill out, get back to different regulators. labor forms, tax forms, foreign exchange forms, different shapes and natures of governance, compliance. Not only the amount of money that it costs is prohibitive for many people starting a new business, but the amount of time it takes just saps effort and energy. And keep in mind that when I'm trying to build a business, it's not that I'm building a business in a vacuum. I'm building a business that actually has to compete against people who are from other parts of the world, and they've got far more time and much easier access to capital than we've got, because they don't face the same regulations and red tape. So I'll make up the number. The Economist cites these statistics. I read this article yesterday. It's approximately right. I think in 2014, South Africa ranked in terms of economic freedom. I think we ranked about 30th, 32nd in the world. The last time the Fraser Institute scored us, which was a year or two back, 2022, 2023, I think we had moved from ranking 32 in the world or 34 in the world, we had moved to 94 in the world. We could play a game. Imagine who hangs out with us ranking 94th in the world. Would you like to have a guess who our comparator is?
It must be a very poorly functioning African country.
Okay, it's Nicaragua.
Okay.
And if I said to you our comparator is Nicaragua, it'd be like, I'm glad you say wow. It's like, holy smokes, what have we done?
What I know there's that global ranking for how hard is it to start a business.
Ease of doing business, yeah.
What is where are we on that at the moment? Not doing well.
Yeah, I'm not allowed to cite that because they stopped. So they stopped recording ease of doing business. I forget who was building it, but it might have been. I better not say who's building it because in the moment I'm forgetting who the author was. But the complaint on ease of doing business was they were surveying rather than getting hard numbers in. And if you could find the right people to complain, you could get the country a really bad score. But when you've got good stories to tell about countries, people don't complain about this. And there's a fantastic story around Kenya, which in 2015 or so, Kenya must have ranked 100th in the world in terms of difficulty of doing business. And Charity Wayua, she's a PhD biochemist from Purdue. She was brought into Kenya by the head of state to run a SWAT team and to figure out how they could improve ease of doing business. And in the space of 3 or 4 years, Charity Wayua and her team, a handful of people, helped Kenya leapfrog 20, 25 places in the space of 3-4 years in ease of doing business. So somehow, when you move in the right direction, it's okay to use ease of doing business. When you go in the wrong direction, people say, no, it's the wrong measurement. But I'm going to use Charity Wayua's work in Kenya to say, well, if they could go 20, 25 places in the right direction, how does South Africa manage to go 60 places, 50 places in the wrong direction? Because we went from 30th in the world in 2010. We went to 84th or 85th in the world the last time that metric was used. And that just speaks of red tape, bureaucracy. People immediately push back and they say, but you can open a business easily in South Africa. Yes, you can. I actually had a company that became a shell company that I was trying to wind up and close down. I think it's taken me a year to close this business, and the amount of accounting, compliance, legal work that has gone in, the expense that I've had to go to close this business that hasn't had revenue for 5 years is like unimaginable. How can this not be done online? A couple of clicks of a button. I've filled in the forms. I've paid all the tax. Here's the proof. Can we move on now? The red tape involved is just mind-numbing. And then to stay with an African example, because I think this really resonates in the local context, is even more impressive than Kenya's migration and ease of doing business. Rwanda has gone from 120th in the world in 2010. Rwanda ranked 120th in the world in difficulty of doing business. Rwanda now ranks 30th in the world.
They're almost 2 decades into quite good sustained economic growth, 7% or something like that. I'm not sure what it was, but it was
7% per annum.
For almost 20 years, I think now, 15 or 20
but
years.
But now you need to be careful about complaining about the single party state.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the social cohesion's like there, but we have a lot of intersectionality in South Africa by the time we're done with economic echelons, races, religions, languages. We are quite a difficult country to get any kind of universal cohesion on. Before we leave NHI, I've got one last question. One's a comment, and then just one brief question. First of all, I agree that we need some kind of NHI in South Africa. Some kind of properly functioning universal healthcare is an absolute must. I don't think anybody is going to be arguing with that. What I will say is I personally think Dr. Nicholas Crisp is a snake oil salesman. I don't think that he has revenant power. He's got medical degrees coming out of his ears. I don't think he understands anything about economics or finance. I don't think he understands that much about public health. And in my opinion, he's a lobbyist. He's a paid lobbyist by the ANC, well appointed as a cadre. And because he has revenant power and he comes in a little bit of a disguise, he doesn't look like Stalin, doesn't walk around like Stalin. People haven't noticed him, and I think he's completely wrong about a lot of things, and I don't think that NHI is sustainable on a financial level in any way. I cannot see any possibility of it being sustainable or even being able to get it off the ground. You obviously have a much better understanding of the landscape than I do. Please tell me why I'm wrong.
So, I won't make any comment on your observations about individuals. I leave that. That's your comment, your observation, and I don't feel it's appropriate for me to either defend, comment, or
understandably
make some judgment. So that's your comment and your argument. My point of reference would be that first, universal healthcare in South Africa is a possible outcome if we get the fundamentals right. So let's go back to the first 1,000 days. And if I saw in NHI, just this absolute obsession with we're going to get the first 1,000 days right, that would give me so much more courage and confidence. But we haven't really seen that. We haven't heard that. We're going to fix the healthcare system that voters know about. So I think it takes us for idiots that, or some of us for idiots, that this is ushered in a few weeks ahead of a national election. As it stands, I agree with you. It is not financially viable. That even crude back of the envelope calculations suggest that marginal tax rates would need to hike to maybe into the 60% or even 70% marginal tax rate for the highest income earners, for this to be funded in the format that we interpret it in. Then, let's go to, but why do I still stay constructive? Because not only is there a huge resolution available to us in getting those 1,000 days right. Second, I made the point earlier about education spend as a percentage of GDP. I can make the exact same comment about healthcare. South Africa spends more on healthcare as a percentage of GDP than any other middle income country. Yet we have some of the poorest healthcare outcomes. So what's going wrong between the spend and the outcome? And then the third point, that's the part to fix. And then the third point is if I go back to the example that I made in the business that we built with Ntabaseng, Lehuete, what we were able to demonstrate in those pilot models, and we built 4 facilities in Tembisa, in Alex, in Diepsloot, and in Soweto. What we were able to show in those 4 facilities was that we could get a patient from front door to exit in, let me call it 30 minutes. We were targeting 20, but we could get a person front door to exit in 30 minutes. That's giving us a little slack if anyone fact checks me on this. The system is entirely paper-based. They left the facility with meds in hand. We had a dispensary on site, and at 250 Rand per person, they were able to leave with meds in hand, with us addressing 95% of the patients that came through the front door with everything on site. There's 5% that you can't solve. And that 250 is underneath the NHI price point.
And if you couldn't help them, you would get them an ambulance to another facility included in the 250.
Exactly. We built a self-insurance model that we could get them to Barra, Helen Joseph, and have them in that hospital, taken to hospital by our contracted, not our ambulance service, but our contracted ambulance service. And when we, ask people in follow-ups after this, how did you find this service? Many of them report this as some of the greatest sense of dignity they've felt in healthcare in their lives. And the work that we're doing in those 4 pilots was not gunshot wounds, stabbings. This was, prenatal. This was mothers with babies in arms. This is like the fundamental stuff that makes society function. And here I'll make a complaint that trying to convince business in South Africa that we had found a viable model that we could scale. We could scale this. My Excel's dangerous, but our financial modeling and economic industrial modeling, we figured that there is probably a need for something like 300 facilities, at least 300 facilities, of this nature. And it's not that this requires funding. It requires funding to get through the valley of death. Valley of death is about 9 months, and the facilities were then cash flow positive. And the impact on society is remarkable. The impact for shareholders is remarkable. So these are viable entities, and it's about businesses that do good for community, doing good for owners. It's like this fantastic cocktail of impact. South Africa can't see this. We'll complain.
I've got a very poor memory for names, but I've told literally dozens of people about the business model that you're talking about now, and very excitedly as well. I can just remember the aspects of the model, like that it's on one floor, no elevator, ambulance afterwards, medicine included. And if there's anybody out in South Africa that's listening to the show and they're interested in the medical field, the medical market, that kind of thing, they really need to go and have a look at this model. It is truly phenomenal. It's Dr. Lehuete, you say?
Yeah, so look, unfortunately, if anyone is listening, unfortunately, we ran out of road. And so the business fell over. We couldn't find the shareholder support that we needed. Medicine is a cash hungry. We made some mistakes. Let's call it as it is. And the single biggest mistake that we made was we scaled too quickly. We were thrilled by our early success in the first pilot in Diepsloot, and we then scaled too quickly. And we made some rookie mistakes in building the business. What it doesn't change, so absolutely I will own those mistakes that we made. What it doesn't change is first the impact that these facilities have in community. The second is that we evidenced that here is a viable model that can scale. If if there is anyone listening that's got interest, wow,
I would absolutely
golden
love to see that get off the ground again.
Have another go.
I would love to see you have another run at that, because the whole thing was just what a beautiful South African story, and it is a bit sad that you guys did run out of runway in the end.
And it's not, and it's not unicorn stuff, because what we borrowed from is the very well-known Narayana Health model. And there's a Brazilian equivalent called Hello Doctor, similar but different. So it's not as if, this was the first time anyone's had a go at this. We don't imagine that we've somehow discovered a unicorn, and it can't. There's no huge secret. It just needs someone to put their weight behind this, and really lean into it. And there you have it.
Yeah, you've got a pilot project that's gone already. It's amazing, and I truly hope that that's something that you can get off the ground. And I think that those are the kinds of solutions that South Africa needs, not another radical policy, because something like Dr. Legwete and your project didn't require special frameworks, didn't require special policies, didn't require more red tape, or
need no political favor.
You did it within the existing framework.
Your lips to God's ears.
I don't think he's listening to me anymore. Complain too much.
I've got a line.
He'll cut you off like ESCOM. We unfortunately have to hop off that topic right now. We're just kind of running out of time.
Sure.
But let me see if I can combine these two questions. We have some pretty obscure policies that emerge from some pretty weird political parties in South Africa around this time of the year. There's been a lot of laughs when you have a look at people's manifestos or parties' manifestos, and out of this is produced a lot of odd ideologies, especially foreign policy ideologies. And the ANC is chief in its obscure foreign policy dealings. They seem to flip-flop a lot, and this might not be the best kind of thing for international trade. For example, with the debacle over the Russian ship and us almost losing AGOA rights. And what do you think of the strange obscurity that emerges out of South African politics, both from smaller parties and from our leading dominant party, in terms of the way the rest of the world sees us for trade, for political alignment? Do they see us as a bit of an odd child? Or are there countries that see past this and are more interested in other things, like our commodities production, and they largely ignore the noise? Or are these radical narratives that come out of our political parties, are they really that concerning to the rest of the world when they look at us?
South Africa is... So I think, that on this we schizophrenic. That it's very hard to figure out what South Africa thinks about itself. Because sometimes we face West, sometimes we face East, and we know that in an increasingly polarized world, and here I'll go out on a limb, and I think that the world is going to become even more polarized later this year when we get Trump 2. That's my guess. But it's very hard to... It's impossible to face West and East based on South Africa's positioning. One moment we're talking this way, then we're talking that way. We want to go, but we're happy with the Russian ships, etc. It's like, how on earth do I make sense of this thing? And there's a couple of things that you make me think of immediately. The first is that in this schizophrenic behavior, South Africa is conducting itself as if somehow our most important trade partners don't matter. And although the East has become increasingly important, we still do most of our trade and most of our capital comes from the West. and you cannot dismiss that reality. So you better figure out how to keep this partner, trade partner and investment partner, close and happy. In that breath, we have not taken the fullest advantage of that. The world is awash with capital, looking for places to invest, and we have squandered that opportunity by speaking with two voices and by making it difficult for foreign capital in this country. And foreign capital is extractive if you allow it to be. Foreign capital is inclusive and productive if you insist on it being that. So, I think that this thing about foreign capital bad, good capital good is an absolute nonsense. It's all about the regulatory frameworks. And then the third point is, if we could take, a leaf out of anyone's book in this environment, it would be Modi, who has he is a masterclass in diplomacy, showing us how India, has been able to keep the West close, whilst at the same time engaging the East. It's an absolute masterclass in diplomacy. And why is South Africa not digesting these lessons, and also, bringing home the fundamental principles that it's hard to, paddle up a fast-running river if you've pushed your biggest, motor off the boat. You're left with oars, and you got to paddle hard. Why are we alienating our biggest trade partners and our biggest capital providers? I don't get it.
Yeah, we do seem to be on an increasing policy, ANC-driven policy, where we are isolating ourselves to some extent from future possibilities. We're just making ourselves increasingly more difficult to deal with as a country. And again, I believe that this has to do with the flip-floppy kind of leadership that we have from the ANC. We've also had guys like Patel and Gordon, who've been very, very bad on a local level for our economy and our policies and our ability to produce. And I think that's also been very, very harmful in terms of the way that the rest of the world looks at us, having a lot of ideologues leading what should be quite clinical, economic and business-based policy decisions.
Without letting that point go, I would not single out any minister or policymaker. I think that's, to my mind, that's just way too pointed. Rather I would make these observations. In many places, South Africa's policy is fantastic. We have got some of the best policies in the world, where we have dulled or muted, or even neutered those policies, is by putting so much regulatory red tape into them that, notwithstanding the world's the best efforts in the world, you just can't get the rubber to hit the road because all of these things that are in the way. And then in the same breath, some of our policy is misguided. There's no country in the world that's got policy perfect.
I think your opinion is very balanced and fair, especially in relation to mine. I come off as somewhat pessimistic, but that's why they don't pay me the big bucks. I'd like to hop over quickly to Palestine and Israel. And South Africa has obviously chosen a side on this matter. And I don't want to get into the morality, the ethics, or the religion of it. I believe that the future for Israel, the best future for that area of land, Palestine, Israel, Gaza, is going to be a one-man, one-vote universal system. I don't know if it'll happen in my lifetime. My dad hoped for it. It didn't happen in his lifetime. I believe that there's solutions that can be made in the area. I don't think things are as drastic as they say. We can push out the fundamentalists. It wouldn't take that much of a push. We can sort out the area of the holy sites. You could hand that over to the King of Jordan. He would manage them, make sure that they're free and that people could access them. And the only issue, or one of the biggest issues, is what would happen with the economy or the economics of the region. It's one of the missing pillars that if you did get the King of Jordan to take over the holy sites, and you did push out the fundamentalists, and you did get one man, one vote, all this long dream list of wishes that I have, what would you do to stabilize the economy in the region? Do you have any ideas, even if it's just spitballing?
Sure. Well, first I have to tell you I'm massively relieved that you didn't ask me, to try and venture some opinion on the politics or how this.
You're more than welcome to. The problem is it becomes a little bit too contentious.
No. I think these issues are first deeply personal. It's very hard to venture opinions without provoking reactions on one or both sides, and it's certainly way outside of my realm of expertise to try and venture any opinions. There was one thought that came to mind as you were talking about could they find resolution, is you have to pray with every fiber that resolution is found, because what's going on there is just ghastly by every measure. And there's some fantastic work done on finding reconciliation in what seems to be irreconcilable differences. And here, Israel, Gaza could take a leaf from South Africa's book, that we haven't fixed this country by a long measure, but we tomorrow will hold another free, fair, transparent, universal election that will get a leadership elected by this country. That universal democracy is achievable, notwithstanding a violent and horrific history in this country. So, I would make reference to the potential of finding reconciliation in what seems to be irreconcilable. And there are other examples from history that we could go to. But that isn't your question. Thankfully, your question is about what are the prospects for the economy, and I think that's impossible to imagine or speculate. I would say it's speculation until we know what a political settlement or resolution looks like. Otherwise we're in the land of speculation. Of course. If some part of a country pulls away or achieves independence or coalesces with another, what could it look like? And here you remind me of unusual circumstances with Singapore being ejected from Malaysia. And in the 1960s, Malaysia, we don't want you guys. Singapore, off you go on your own. And this very, very poor fishing village, Singapore, becomes one of the most vibrant, affluent, prosperous places in the world. A leading center of biotech, medicine, other technologies, huge amounts of multinational capital going in. So when it comes to economics, I think I'll leave the forecasting to other people.
Fair enough. It was. I even thought about leaving that question out in its entirety. It was so difficult to navigate. This one's a bit easier. We're still in the realm of international relations and that kind of thing.
Sure.
Brics. Is Brics ever going to be, or especially in my lifetime, is it going to be a significant trading bloc? Have we aligned ourselves neatly with Russia to some extent? Is Brics more just India carrying everybody else along? Is Brics for real, or is this just a pipe dream?
Brilliant. So Brics initially is a completely artificial construct. Jim O'Neill makes this up. Here's an interesting acronym, and he didn't throw in countries that didn't make a nice acronym. He threw in countries that made an acronym. Good economics, he got, it was like flipping a coin. He got half right, half wrong. Brazil and Russia, he got wrong. India and China, he got right. I hear you making some sort of reserved or restrained observations about China. Let's just deal with the economy. China's economic performance under Brics has been impressive. India's has been even more impressive. And if you think about the sustained growth that comes out of this four-ball, South Africa is not a member. It's an attachment, but of that like real heart of the four BRIC members, my money's on India. That structurally they're in the business of 6-7% economic growth for the next decade or more. I've already made observations about Modi, huge capabilities in the STEM disciplines, science, engineering,
young
mathematics,
educated population,
young educated, and they almost leapfrogging right through the manufacturing stages of industrialization. They're leapfrogging from agriculture all the way to services. So my money's on India as the BRIC nation that is the most impressive. I don't mean to be disparaging about South Africa, saying, we don't, but we're so small, in that we're just not a game changer. We're at the table, but we're not the voice. The voice are the other four members. Russia is tricky to make observations on because of their, isolationist and aggressive policies. Brazil has got... My one-liner on Brazil, some years ago, The Economist ran a cover where they said Brazil is the country of the future, and then the subtext was, and it always will be. It's just like this constant promise. But you're making a different, you're raising a different question in that, and the first is the enlarged BRICS, that there is a cohesion in the enlarged BRICS. And the cohesion, what binds them together is that they are not American, that they are not US. That's what binds them. And I wouldn't underestimate how powerful that can be as a binding agent, having someone that we are not at one with. Who do I support in football? Anyone who beats Man United.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yeah. So philosophically, I would think about that, because if you think of the enlarged BRICS, it's a really eclectic gathering, but there is a cohesion in that eclectic gathering. Do they have the capacity to become a game changer? At the moment, I think the cohesion it's incoherent. It's not really apparent what they're up to, other than that it's not the United States. And based on that, I don't think that they have, as it stands, the making to be equivalent to NATO or equivalent to Western Europe as an economic coagulant, or a united trade or political or military bloc. I just don't see that yet. But small changes can have profound impacts. And here I'm referencing the events in the run-up to World War I or World War II, where in the space of months you get alignment and cohesion, where people who seem to be, we've got nothing to do with each other, suddenly, Russia and the United States are allied.
Yes.
In World War II. What binds us? Germany. I wouldn't lose sight of that. And so I think that, whilst a lot of focus in thinking about the investment landscape, the business landscape, capital markets at the moment, a lot of focus is on AI, data, new industries. I would have even more attention on the geopolitical landscape, because your point about BRICS is that this could be a game changer. There's so much I could say here. I just wouldn't become too animated about things as they stand. So could the renminbi displace the dollar, for instance? Not as it stands. If the renminbi did some interesting things, yes, it could. Could Brics form a currency? Hard to see that because the interests are so different or diverse. If that happened, could it become globally accepted means of exchange, store of value? Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine so. We down to our last question or two, but before we leave this particular topic, I would like to just make a comment on the conflict in Russia with Russia and Ukraine, and just see what your feeling is about it. A lot of people think that the war in Ukraine is chiefly led by an ideological purpose, primarily Putin's vision of an old Soviet Union that he somehow wants to reunite. I believe that the move on Ukraine was primarily driven by the economic need for a food production basket for Russia, given its projections around growth and that sort of thing. And I believe that they went in there knowing that the best thing that they could do was to secure massive agricultural space that is a great producer. And this was chiefly their purpose. And as a result of this, Russia will not give up on the war ever until they capture Ukraine, because they so desperately need it for the future of its economic growth. And that the ideology was a secondary issue in the whole thing. But people have somehow latched onto the ideology and removed themselves from Russia's economic motivations. Do you think that this is maybe a little bit far-fetched, or maybe just not enough data or evidence to really support it in any way?
I don't know why, but I can never quite remember Churchill's quote on Russia about the secret mystery enigma, about a secret wrapped in a mystery bound in a, and if you want to understand Russia, good luck. Yeah, so I'm gonna lean on Churchill, to help me with that, and I've absolutely butchered his elegant quote. But trying to understand Russia first, good luck. But I'll have a go, at trying to make a couple of observations about it. The first, I think that what you say makes a huge amount of sense, because Russia is in the six-factor model. You might remember we did this at Gibbs. This is my work on understanding the 6 things that drive the growth structure of a country. One of the 6 factors is demography, and Russia doesn't have demography. This critical ingredient is missing. Russia needs babies. And if they can't get babies, they can actually bolster their demography by growing population, immigration, or immigration by claim. So Ukraine now belongs to us. This will boost your demographic footprint. So I'd tip that in, that adding Ukraine's population to Russia helps the demographic structure a tiny bit. But I don't think that in and of itself. I hear what you say about the food basket. That makes good sense. And I'd put one more into it, that Russia for a long time has wanted control over this much, much bigger territory, and even further than Eastern Europe. I'm not going to go into grand politics. I'll leave that for someone else's expertise. But if you just look at the map of the region, it won't be lost on anyone scanning that map, that if you have a look at the shape of Ukraine, if you're inside Ukraine, you're on the doorstep of Europe. You're at their back door. And it gives you disproportionate political power. And for a long time, I think Russia has been the sort of the poor cousin in terms of having a seat at the global table. It became more pronounced post-World War II.
Absolutely.
For a short time. And then that voice was lost. And what I think you're seeing Putin do in some regard is a display of huge pent-up frustration of we are bigger, we are more important, we're more industrialized, we're militarily stronger than any of you are recognizing. Here we are. What has stunned me is the Ukraine's tenacity. And Ivan Toft has done some fascinating work on looking at the outcomes of military of war. And what he finds increasingly is that smaller nations have disproportionate success, majority success, in beating major aggressor nations by adopting sort of disruptor strategies.
Yes.
Ukraine, in a nutshell.
Yeah, they have led a modern guerrilla warfare, Ukraine, very modern style guerrilla warfare, tapping into very odd technologies and new developments. And in that sense, they've done quite well to manage the apex warfare that's taking place. But I just don't think it's sustainable in the long run in relation to Russia's. We've seen twice before again Winston Churchill quote about not marching on the Russians. I know they said specifically in winter, but I don't think in summer is a good idea either. They win wars of attrition.
Yeah, and I think that's you're making the point. I think that's exactly what's going on. This is a battle of attrition. The Russians haven't put a boot on NATO soil. If they do, I think all bets are off.
I wish we could talk about this again. It's a very rich topic. Sooner or later, we'd end up chatting about Dostoevsky. But I'd like to, before we round out, just the final question for the day, and it could be perhaps one of the most difficult. When we started at the beginning, we were talking about how difficult it is to access public intellectuals. From that, I would like to talk about what I consider to be the shadow separation of powers in South Africa, where you have the formal separation of powers, and that's obviously very necessary for a functioning democracy. But within that, there's something else that I think a vibrant, healthy democracy requires. It requires, first of all, an independent media and journalism aspect of society. The other thing it requires a free-thinking, publicly accessible and balanced quorum of what I call public intellectuals. Those are basically your senior intellectuals at public universities and your professors. And what I've noticed is a similar breakdown where you have politicians that were doing the revolving door with banks and big corporates, and one moment they're a minister in this portfolio, and the next minute they're on a board somewhere here, and there's conflicts of interest. And what I've noticed a very cozy relationship to some extent between our senior public intellectuals in South Africa and institutions and the government. And I don't think that our public intellectuals are outspoken enough. They're like our business leaders. During this whole NHI thing, everybody was cozying up to government. Nobody was outspoken about it. People were very quiet, and then when the bill was signed, they said, no, we're so shocked. And I don't believe that there was enough public pushback on that kind of thing. I think in the private education space, the same with the Bella bill, all your captains of industry, they love the ANC as it is, and everything's fine, and they have this and I'm noticing the same in the academic space. And I think that this fails the robustness of South Africa's democratic space, that we have captains of industry, that we have leading intellectuals, public intellectuals that are becoming increasingly less accessible and increasingly less outspoken on public issues because of this synergy that seems to be going on when there should be some kind of moral and ethical separation of powers. I don't know if you've seen this. I know that you've probably seen it in the corporate space. But I don't know if you have an opinion of it in the corporate space or in the educational space or in any other space where you see this kind of thing slowly starting to break down. We certainly saw it with the overlap between politicians and journalism and media outlets, like with the Guptas. Mm-hmm. people close to politics, people close to journalism and media, obscure opinions coming out. What do you think of my concept around the shadow separation of powers that is making our democracy less robust?
Maybe I can remind you that
you're here today.
Under apartheid South Africa, the National Party owned a newspaper, and there were microphones in lecture theatres.
Oh wow! I didn't actually know that.
Yeah. So and that was the start of my teaching career. Where there was censorship, and so there is no point in recent times where I have ever felt gagged or restrained in being able to venture an opinion. And not to overplay the saying, but from my lips to God's ears, South Africa has a liberal media. We have a liberal, free, balanced judiciary. I don't think that there is in any shape or form censure on thinking or the ability to speak in either the media or in academia. These aren't my areas of expertise, so these are very, very private views, but there is no time, where I have ever felt, at risk or at fear of expressing my opinion, either, on to a microphone, to a camera, or in print in some form. Things are fiercely debated. I don't think that we've seen the end of the NHI. Not for one moment are we even remotely close to the NHI debate being ended. Have we got examples where policymakers and politicians have leaned on people to say things? Absolutely. But tell me that's not different to anywhere else in the world. But are we somehow gagged or muted? Not for one moment. In the same breath, I would share I would express a frustration that I think big business in South Africa in particular has been far too quiet for far too long.
Definitely.
And that if and it's not about blaming. So making expressing something, or every healthy relationship is, I disagree with you. Here's why I disagree. How do we bind together as partners and solve this? So we've got into, I think, big business, big labor, big government, a very dysfunctional triad that is finger pointing, blaming, and accusation, and it's not one of partnership. Every country, that has successfully transitioned and transformed is one of partnership, and we have to get out of the blame game and we have to get into the partnership game. And part of partnering is being able to healthily express disagreement, find each other through that disagreement, and achieve resolution.
What we seem to do in South Africa, instead of having healthy discussions, great partnerships, robust debate, we have rubbish partnerships, lousy debate, and then we come up with some kind of policy and then we let the courts sort it out. It's what we did with the e-tolls, and it's what we're about to do with the NHI. We didn't debate properly, we didn't have robust enough negotiations and that sort of thing, and we've come up with a rubbish policy again, and now we're going to let the courts sort it out. It's the South African way. It's our own version of hyper litigation. I wish that we could discuss this forever. We've already gone quite a long way over time.
Sure.
I would just like to know if you have any final thoughts, what your hopes are for the future, what your aspirations are, if you'd maybe like to talk about your new business.
Sure.
and just give you the last couple of minutes just to, I don't know, get anything off your chest and to maybe advertise for yourself as well a little bit.
Well, I mean, I can't help but sort of quip or retort to, well, if the courts are going to sort it out, thank goodness the courts can sort it out. You know, these are powerful attributes in society and South African society, and we can debate this freely, you know, in the media, on radio, in print, in front of camera. My aspiration, my deep desire for South Africa is that post 29 May this year, we find a leadership that binds us, and that binds us in purpose. That's my first deep desire, and that purpose quickly manifests in action. That we get out of this business of talking, pointing, blaming, and get on with building this country. There are few places in the world that are more magnificent, you know, this country. When the great creator sat down and blessed places, we are so well endowed. We've got everything that's needed to make a magnificent place if we could just get on with it. You know, that's my great wish. You know, my very personal, private aspiration. I'm involved in a career reset. I spent the first part of my career building an investment firm, a well-regarded boutique investment firm. I had a huge amount of fun and a very big impact doing it. That came to an end a couple of years back. I've spent some time doing a reset, and I'm working in essentially alongside my business school professorship. I'm working in two important areas. The first is a brand new go at building in investment firm version 2 with all of the lessons and learnings. So hopefully making something even more magnificent than the first baby. So that happened at the end of last year. We're out the blocks, brand new build. And then the second is a place where I'm finding huge purpose and getting incredible satisfaction from, I suppose, is working with a couple of corporate partners in consulting relationships, helping them think about the markets that they're working in, the way that they go into those markets, the business models they take in those markets. And I think I'm at liberty to say that these partners include people like Time Bank, which is the most incredible new venture born out of South Africa, a huge success in Philippines, quickly growing into other parts of the region, Indonesia, Vietnam. I've had fantastic work with DHL over the last year or two, using Pan-African data with PPC, thinking about their African portfolio, and with Illovo Sugar Africa, thinking about their business model and their portfolio of countries that they're working in. These are what an incredible privilege to work with these partners and thinking about where they go and how they go.
I don't even know where to tell you or how to tell you to contract Adrian. It would depend on what you want from him, basically. There's the academic space, the investment space. You've got so many things going on. You are truly one of South Africa's best public academics. There's no doubt about it. You do a lot of interviews. You're outspoken. You have an incredible body of knowledge. If you'd ever like to get hold of him, you can do so through the Gordon Institute of Business Science or through his private investment firm. I would just like to thank you. I have wanted to do this for really a long time. You're one of the best lecturers that I've ever had as well. I guess...
It's a huge compliment, thank you.
Just thank you so much for your time. I'm done blowing hot air on Adrian. And thank you so much for your time, and we hope to engage with you sometime in the future. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been Matjiu, Professor Adrian Saville. I'm Aidan Brown. Bye for now. That's it.
Brilliant.